Here's the complete cinematic story, written as one continuous narrative with a daytime setting and an emotional, satisfying ending. The waiter had just placed the bill on our table when I looked at the total, forced a nervous laugh, and said the words that nearly destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to me: "I don't have enough money for this date." I expected embarrassment. I expected her to stare at me with disappointment, maybe quietly reach for her purse and wonder why she had agreed to meet a man like me. Instead, she did something so unexpected that I still struggle to explain what it felt like. She picked up the bill, folded it carefully, pushed it back toward me, and then reached across the table and took my trembling hand. If you believe that kindness can change a life, that forgiveness can heal wounds, and that hope sometimes arrives through the most unexpected person, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you can stay with our community for more stories about second chances. My name is Caleb Mercer, and at 34, I had become very good at pretending I was doing better than I actually was. From the outside, I looked like an ordinary man with a steady job, a clean apartment, and enough confidence to walk into a nice restaurant without looking intimidated. But appearances can be cruel liars. The truth was that I had spent the previous 2 years trying to rebuild my life after my small construction business collapsed. I had lost contracts, accumulated debts, sold my truck, moved into a smaller apartment, and taken a maintenance job at a commercial building just to keep myself afloat. I wasn't starving, but I was constantly calculating. Every grocery purchase had a reason. Every utility bill had a deadline. Every unexpected expense felt like a stone dropped into a backpack I was already struggling to carry. And because I was ashamed of how far I had fallen, I had stopped telling people the truth. That was how I met Margot Ellis. She worked for a local architectural firm in the same building where I did maintenance, although we had never properly spoken before. I first noticed her because she was always carrying too many things. A laptop bag hung from one shoulder, folders were tucked under her arm, and she somehow managed to balance a cup of coffee without spilling it. She wasn't the loudest person in the building or the one who demanded attention. In fact, she seemed almost deliberately ordinary. But there was something about her that made people feel noticed. She remembered the security guard's birthday. She brought pastries for the receptionist after a difficult week. She once spent 20 minutes helping an elderly delivery driver find the correct entrance even though she was clearly late for a meeting. Our first real conversation happened when a storm had caused a leak on the 3rd floor, and I was trying to fix a damaged ceiling panel while she waited nearby with a stack of drawings. She didn't complain about the inconvenience. Instead, she asked whether I needed another pair of hands. I laughed and told her that if she touched anything, the ceiling might actually collapse. She smiled, and that smile stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Over the following weeks, our conversations became longer. We discovered that we both loved old bookstores, terrible roadside coffee, and taking long walks through neighborhoods where the houses had stories older than the people living in them. Eventually, Margot asked if I wanted to have lunch with her. I nearly said no. I had spent so much time avoiding situations where money might expose me that the invitation frightened me more than it excited me. But she looked at me with such uncomplicated warmth that I couldn't bring myself to invent another excuse. I agreed, then spent the next 3 days worrying about how much the meal might cost. On the morning of our date, I checked my bank account 3 times. After paying rent and buying groceries, I had just enough money for something simple. I had planned everything carefully. We would eat somewhere inexpensive, take a walk afterward, and I would make sure she never realized how nervous I was. But when I arrived at the restaurant she had chosen, my stomach dropped. It wasn't extravagant, but it was far more elegant than anywhere I could comfortably afford. There were white tablecloths, polished glasses, flowers in small vases, and a menu where the prices made my heart beat faster. Margot arrived wearing a simple blue dress and a cream-colored coat. She wasn't dressed to impress anyone. She looked comfortable, relaxed, and happy to see me. For the first 20 minutes, I almost forgot about money. We talked about childhood memories, embarrassing jobs, dreams we had abandoned, and the strange ways adulthood rarely turned out the way people imagined. Margot told me that when she was a teenager, she wanted to become a painter, but her father had convinced her that art wasn't practical. She eventually became an architect, yet she still painted whenever she could find time. Then the waiter placed the menus in front of us. I studied mine while trying not to look alarmed. The least expensive main course was still more than I had planned to spend. I could have chosen it, but then there was the question of drinks, tax, and everything else. My confidence slowly disappeared. Margot noticed something was wrong and asked whether I was okay. I smiled and tried to make a joke. I told her that I had apparently made one tiny mistake when choosing the restaurant because I had forgotten that my bank account and my ambitions were currently living in completely different neighborhoods. She laughed, but I could see the worry in her eyes. And then, because fear makes people say things they normally wouldn't, I looked at the menu and joked that I didn't have enough money for this date. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. I expected her to laugh awkwardly. Instead, she became completely still. She looked at me for several seconds, then quietly asked whether I was serious. I tried to turn it into another joke, but she didn't let me. She asked me to tell her the truth. So I did. For the first time in years, I told someone everything. I told her about my failed business, the debts, the apartment, the maintenance job, and the shame that followed me everywhere. I admitted that I had nearly cancelled the date because I was afraid she would think less of me. I told her that I had spent years believing a man had to be financially successful before he deserved someone's affection. By the time I finished, I couldn't look at her. Margot didn't say anything for a moment. Then she did something I'll never forget. She reached into her purse, took out her wallet, and placed her card beside the bill. But before I could protest, she pushed the card away and tore the bill in half. I stared at her, confused. She smiled gently and told me that the restaurant wasn't what she had come to see. She hadn't agreed to the date because she wanted someone who could impress her with money. She had agreed because she liked the man who remembered the names of the cleaning staff, who fixed broken doors without being asked, who carried an elderly woman's packages to her car, and who always stayed late when someone else needed help. Then she opened her purse again. This time, she pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of a young man standing beside a construction project. The man was her older brother, Adrian. She told me that he had been a contractor and had lost his company years earlier after a series of terrible financial decisions. The collapse had destroyed his confidence. He stopped returning calls, stopped seeing friends, and eventually moved away because he couldn't stand being around people who remembered him as successful. Margot had spent years watching someone she loved confuse financial failure with personal failure. She looked directly at me and told me that she wasn't going to watch another good man make the same mistake. Then she did something even more unexpected. She suggested we leave. Not because she was disappointed, but because she wanted our first date to be somewhere neither of us had to pretend. We walked out of the restaurant and found a small public garden a few blocks away. We bought 2 inexpensive sandwiches from a street vendor, sat beneath a tree, and laughed until my stomach hurt. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what someone thought of me. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few months, Margot became more than the woman I was dating. She became the person who challenged the version of myself I had built around shame. She never rescued me financially. She never treated me like a charity project. Instead, she encouraged me to rebuild what I had lost. When I told her I wanted to start another construction business but was terrified of failing again, she asked me what I had learned from the first failure. When I said I had learned that talent wasn't enough, she told me that perhaps that was the lesson I had been avoiding. She encouraged me to create a smaller business, focus on repairs and renovations, and grow slowly rather than chasing the kind of success that had destroyed me the first time. I listened. I started with almost nothing. My first customer was an elderly woman whose porch railing needed repair. The second was a teacher who needed a classroom door replaced. Then came a kitchen renovation, a bathroom repair, and eventually several larger projects. Margot never took credit for any of it. She simply believed in me long enough for me to start believing in myself. But just when things were finally improving, Adrian came back. Margot's brother appeared one afternoon while we were sitting outside a cafe, reviewing plans for a small renovation project. He looked older than the photograph she had shown me, but there was still something familiar in his expression. He apologized to Margot before he even sat down. He told her he had spent years blaming everyone else for the collapse of his company because blaming himself was easier than admitting he was afraid. Then he turned toward me. He knew who I was. He had heard about my business and knew that Margot had been encouraging me. For a moment, I wondered whether he was going to judge me. Instead, he apologized for something that had nothing to do with me. He told me that when he heard about my financial struggles, he had been tempted to warn Margot to stay away from me because he thought struggling financially meant someone was unstable. Then he admitted that he had been wrong. He said that his greatest mistake wasn't losing his company. It was believing that losing money meant losing his worth. Those words stayed with me. Adrian eventually offered to help me with larger construction projects, but I didn't accept immediately. I wanted to know whether I could stand on my own first. Months later, when my business had grown enough to hire 2 employees, I accepted his partnership. It wasn't a rescue. It was a collaboration between 2 men who had both learned that failure didn't have to be the final chapter. A year after that first date, Margot and I returned to the same restaurant. This time, I could afford the meal. But before we sat down, I took her hand and told her that I wanted to remember the first date exactly as it happened. Not because I was embarrassed anymore, but because it had changed me. I had once believed that the most important thing a man could bring to a relationship was money. Margot taught me that the most valuable things could never be bought. Honesty, kindness, patience, courage, and the willingness to stay when someone finally stops pretending to be okay. She smiled, and instead of sitting at the expensive table, she suggested we leave again. So we did. We walked to the little public garden where we'd eaten those cheap sandwiches a year earlier. We sat beneath the same tree, watching families walk through the afternoon sunlight. I told her that I had spent years trying to prove I was worth loving. She squeezed my hand and reminded me that I never needed to prove it. That was the moment I finally understood what she had done for me on that first date. She hadn't paid my bill. She had paid attention to the person underneath it. And sometimes, that is the greatest gift another human being can give. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before you go, leave a comment telling us what you believe matters more in a relationship: financial success, or honesty, kindness, and loyalty. Your answer might remind someone who is struggling that their worth is not measured by the size of their bank account. Because Caleb learned something that afternoon he would carry for the rest of his life: sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one who gives you money when you have none. Sometimes it's the person who sits beside you when you're ashamed, looks past everything you think makes you unworthy, and quietly reminds you that you were never your failures in the first place.